Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I am Todd Norris, and today I wanted to revisit the Sigma 18-35mm lens and its focusing issues. I posted a video a little over a year ago and you guys had lots of comments and questions, so I promised you an update video, and today is that day. For those of you that haven't watched that episode, let me get you up to speed real quick. When I started my YouTube channel, I picked up the Sigma 18-35mm art lens for my Canon 80D. I was shooting some photos down low using live view, and the back of the screen started flashing and then the camera crashed. I rebooted the camera, switched to optical viewfinder, and everything seemed to be working okay. I was walking down this nature trail in this neighborhood and saw this deer, which was really odd. See a deer, near houses in a residential section. But I got close to the deer and started taking some photos before it ran off. When I got home, the photos were all soft and out of focus. So I got online with Sigma, saw that they had a firmware update, purchased the USB dock, updated the firmware, and it fixed the issue with live view, but not the random focusing issue, which I later ran into again. Now that you're all caught up, that was a little over a year ago, and since then I've taken thousands and thousands of images with that lens and hundreds of videos, and so I wanted to clarify a few things. 1. The issue isn't a forward or back focusing issue. When it happens, the entire image is soft. It's also not motion blur from camera shake or a moving subject with a slow shutter speed. 2. It's random. I shot over 500 photos before it happened again this last time. 3. It only happens for a couple of shots and then the rest of the images are fine. 4. It doesn't matter what focal length or aperture I use. My main camera is a Canon 80D, so I don't have any experience using this lens on a Sony or a Nikon camera. 5. It only happens when I'm using the optical viewfinder. If I'm using live view and I touch my focus points on the back of the screen, I never have an issue. And since recording video requires live view, then I never have any issues with video either. Number 6. I have the latest firmware and I've done focus tests for calibration. The lens didn't need any adjustments, which kind of makes sense because it's not a front or back focusing issue. The whole entire image is soft. And lastly, not everyone has this issue with this lens, but a lot of people do. It is one of the most frequently asked questions I get. After all this time, I've come to the conclusion that there has to be some type of element that's getting out of place in the lens, or it's a math error between the camera and the lens. But that's just a guess. It doesn't bother me too much because I always remember if I'm going to be shooting with the optical viewfinder, I'm going to have to overshoot. Or else I just use live view and I don't worry about it. Here are some self-portrait shots I took last week, and I wanted to show these to you guys because I wanted you to see that even with its random issues, there's nothing quite like this lens for a crop sensor camera. I shot those using live view and a wireless shutter release. Now let's get into some of you guys' comments and questions. John McPhee writes, OMG, you described my issue exactly word for word with this lens on the 80D. I got rid of L-series lens and so disappointed with Sigma. I shoot concerts, so really impacted my work. Man, I am sorry to hear that, dude. You can work around the issue by using live view, but if that's not an option for the type of work that you're doing, then I suggest you sell the lens and replace it with something that is going to work for you. And I would do it as soon as possible. And the reason why I say that is because the resale value for DSLR lenses continues to drop as mirrorless gains popularity. I'm not saying DSLR cameras and lenses are going away tomorrow, but what I am saying is that there is no denying the future is mirrorless. Cesar Augusto Tejada writes, same here. Renee Thomas writes, thank you, having the same issue. There are a lot of comments with people who are experiencing the same issue, but what I find interesting is there are a lot of comments for people who aren't experiencing the issue at all, like Roaring Lions Productions, who writes, I use this lens and have no issues. It's a blast. So have these users only been using live view this whole time and that's why they don't experience the issue? Or maybe this issue is specific to certain copies of the lens. I don't know. I can only speak to my experience with the lens, and anything else is just speculation. Bill Caroley writes, I think if you own an art lens, having a USB dock is a must. Bill, I totally agree with you. Empirismo Creativo writes, does this lens work without problems in live view mode of photography? Yes, in live view, I've never had an issue with photography or video. All one word 154 writes, how can a lens that costs so much need so much adjusting? Well, traditionally, lens manufacturers like Canon and Nikon, they don't work with third-party lens manufacturers. So those third-party lens manufacturers have to reverse engineer the communications between the lens and the camera. This is why non-OG equipment or original equipment is not as robust and dependable on those brands. It's also why they're cheaper. I promise you, if this lens had a Canon logo on it, it would cost 2 to 3 times as much. B Unique Designs LLC writes, same issue with the 70D, worked great for about a year, then all of a sudden about 3 months ago the focus was off. I haven't updated the lens firmware, kinda sucks, gotta spend $60 for the USB dock to hope it fixes the issue. Great video. If your lens worked fine for a year and then started having focusing issues, I would suspect it's a different issue than the one I'm having. Did you drop or damage the lens in some way? Because sometimes the elements inside the lens can get out of line and cause you to have focusing issues. And in that case, the USB dock and the Sigma software would be ideal to help you. And you can tell if this is the case because you can reproduce the issue. So say for example, you get your camera on a tripod, you get a stationary subject, everything is still, use a remote trigger, and you shoot off 4 or 5 images, and all of them are either front focusing or back focusing. In other words, it's not focusing exactly where you wanted it to. And if every single image you take is like that, then that USB dock and that software is going to help you. Imi Razan, man, I know I'm probably butchering your name. I am so sorry. Imi Razan writes, if I would buy this lens and then I not update firmware, can use or not? It depends on what camera you're using. If it's an older model, say made before 2013, then you're probably not going to run into an issue. But I would recommend getting that USB dock and upgrading the firmware. Sigma is pretty good about continuing to support their lenses for a while. Just recently, Sigma released an update to make sure that the lens was compatible with the new Canon EOS R. That's 6 years of support, which is pretty cool, Sigma. Mike Schneider writes, do you not calibrate it? You buy the USB dock, but don't even mention calibration. Why? At first, I didn't see the need because it was a random issue and it wasn't front focusing or back focusing. It was completely soft, the whole image. But after your comment, I decided to do the focus test just to be 100% sure. No adjustments were needed. But Mike, I enjoyed our conversation online because it was cool to speak with someone where 2 people have different points of view or don't know the full story, and they were having a civil conversation. And I think that's a great example to set for everybody else. And so I appreciate your comments. Frank Nazario writes, guys, if you have a Nikon D7200 and have the off-center focus issues and a high percentage of out-of-focus situations, please upgrade your firmware to 1.04. It is amazing the difference. You will fall in love with this setup. I just was about to sell this lens, but did this update and now it's amazing. Thanks for the info, Frank, and I'm glad it solved the issue on your Nikon. I recommend getting the USB dock and upgrading the firmware as well. I appreciate all of your comments and feedback, but more importantly, your civility. My subscribers and viewers here range from seasoned professional pros to people who just got their first camera and are starting out in photography. So it's cool to see everyone being respectful in the comments. I don't want anyone, regardless of their skill level, to be afraid to ask a question or comment out of fear of being ridiculed. As for the lens, would I purchase it again? Yes, I would. There's nothing else like it. Canon does make an EFS 17 to 55mm f2.8. It's not as fast as the Sigma, the 1.8, but you do get image stabilization. But that lens was released in 2006 with the Canon 30D. And that Canon 30D was an 8-megapixel camera. That's 14 years ago. When I purchased the Sigma lens, it cost over $1,000, but recently I've seen the price drop as low as $650. If you know its limitations and can work around it, it's worth it for a crop sensor DSLR. If you're using Canon's mirrorless EFM system, I would recommend the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens instead. It's smaller, lighter, and more manageable on those smaller cameras. It also costs less. Just always remember, everything in the camera world is about trade-offs. There's no such thing as a camera and a lens that is perfect for every situation. You have to research and figure out what works best for your needs. It's why I do these videos. Well, that's it for today's video. If you liked today's show, consider smashing that like and subscribe button. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment sections below and I'll answer you. You can also catch me on Instagram here. I'll post some photos from today's video. Until next time, I am Todd Norris. Peace out.